Hi, I'm Philip Bergguist. I'm an elementary peer consultant with the Wichita School District, and right now we are going to go over mentoring language for training number 4. The materials you'll need for this session are your Mentor Tools flipbook and your Mentor Handbook. Before we get started, keep in mind our previous trainings on mentoring language: attending fully, eye listening, pausing and attentive silence, paraphrasing, and our use of plural forms and positive presuppositions in questioning. Today's learning will be a continuation of these topics. The first thing we're going to look over are mediational questions. Mediational questions focus the mentee's thinking and help probe for specificity. One type of mediational questions is open thinking. Open thinking invites a wide range of potential responses, supports in exploring issues, problems, concerns, and ideas. An example of this would be, as you are monitoring your students, what did you notice? Another type of mediational question is focus thinking. Focus thinking elicits examples, criteria, and details that support precision in verbal responses, which in turn reflects precision and more detail in thinking. An example of focus thinking would be when the beginning teacher speaks in general terms like, "I think my lesson went well today," the mentor could follow up with, "What evidence supports your feeling of success?" Here are some examples of invitational question stems. How might you? In what ways? What are some things you're noticing about? What thoughts led to your? When thinking about, what are some strategies based on what has worked in the past? Things that you need to avoid when you think about using invitational question stems are starting off with can you, did you, will you, or have you? These type of questions can put the mentee into a corner and feel like they have to come up with an answer. Now before, we talked about types of paraphrasing, and there's 3 different intentions, supports, and relationships in thinking of these. There are no right sequences for application of these responses, and by listening fully, looking at cues from the speaker, these will help guide which response is needed in your paraphrasing. The first one that we went over was acknowledging and clarifying. The second one was summarizing and organizing, and some new learning was shifting level of abstraction. When looking at acknowledging and clarifying, we restate someone's statements to identify and calibrate content and emotions. We communicate our desire to understand and value for that person what is said and felt. It is also purposeful, and we eliminate that word I. When we look at summarizing and organizing in our paraphrasing, it captures the key elements of a long stream of language. It helps to organize thoughts for the speaker and offers a shape or a focus to the initial statement. Now, when looking at shifting level of abstraction, this most likely creates new levels of understanding for your mentee. This moves thinking to a higher or a lower logical level. It also illuminates large ideas or categories, leading the speaker to new discoveries. Or it focuses or clarifies an increasing precision of thinking. Now, moving on to voice. When we are in a mentor-mentee conversation, we need to make sure that we have that approachable voice. An approachable voice has varied modulation, not staying at one line of intonation for the entire time. There are rises at the end of the statement to create invitation, and this really is used to invite receiving of ideas or comments from others. This is usually used in a coaching stance when we invite the mentee to come up with ideas or strategies of their own. When we look to a credible voice, we usually have even modulation, and there are drops at the end of the statement to make that point. Using a credible voice is used to send information, and as a result, we're usually in a consulting stance when we use a credible voice. Moving on to positive presuppositions. These communicate our belief in a colleague's willingness to engage the conversation or the strategy that's needed for next steps. So when we look at questioning in a positive presupposition, these are embedded in our language, but not always in words, but in assumptions underlying the communication. So in other words, it may be communicated in our tone, our questions, and paraphrases. I would ask you to look at this as a subtle invitation for your mentee to start their next steps. So as some examples, what things would you change about this assignment? So you're naming some possible changes, what seems most promising at this point. With this second one, you are giving them an invitation to move forward with the next step. Another example, can you think of any reasons for that behavior moving forward? What are some of your hunches about why they may occur? Positive presuppositions are also applicable to paraphrasing. An example of that, if the mentee would say, my students just can't do this work. A positive presupposition in paraphrasing on the mentor's part could be, so you're concerned about your students' success. Another example, I don't understand why these kids don't do their homework. So you're noticing that your students are not doing their homework. Something else to notice when using positive presuppositions are the substitutions that we need to think about when we phrase these. Instead of using the, use some. Instead of could, use might. Instead of is, use seems. And instead of why, what? Thank you so much for your professionalism. Your time and expertise and energy have been appreciated. Thank you for supporting your mentee.